The distress beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer it. Council Representative Thexali watched the holographic display with 3 of his 4 eyes, while the 4th monitored his cardiovascular readings. The stress was making his scales itch, and that never happened unless death was imminent. The beacon had been broadcasting for 6 standard cycles now, and the silence from the other council worlds was deafening. "Still nothing?" asked his aide, a young Vexian whose name Thexali could never quite pronounce correctly. "Nothing. The Zynthians claim their fleet is committed to border patrol. The Kravesh say they're dealing with a pirate incursion in the Outer Rim. The Dorvathi won't even respond to our communications." Thexali's scales rippled with frustration. "We're on our own." The situation was simple enough to understand, but impossible to solve. The colony on Mathara 6 was under siege by the Krynex swarm, a plague of biomechanical horrors that consumed everything in their path. 15 million souls huddled in underground bunkers while the swarm tore apart everything above ground. The colony had maybe 10 cycles before the swarm breached the final shelters. After that, it would be a massacre. Thexali had served on the Galactic Council for 40 standard years. He'd seen wars, famines, and disasters that would make lesser species weep. But he'd never seen the Council abandon one of its member worlds so completely. The politics were obvious, of course. Mathara 6 was a border world, barely profitable, populated mostly by refugees and dissidents. Nobody wanted to risk their precious warships for such little gain. "Sir, there is one option we haven't explored," his aide said quietly. "I'm listening." "The humans. They have a listening post in Grid Sector 7. It's only 3 jumps from Mathara 6. Thexali felt his blood chill. The humans. Of course someone would suggest the humans. The galaxy's newest members, admitted to the Council only 15 standard years ago, and still viewed with suspicion by most civilized species. They came from a world classified as a Class 12 death world, a planet so hostile that Council regulations forbade colonization of anything above Class 7. Their sun bombarded them with radiation. Their gravity was crushing. Their atmosphere was filled with volatile oxygen. Their oceans were salty enough to corrode ship hulls. Even their plants were toxic. And yet somehow, humanity had thrived there. "The humans," Thexali repeated slowly. "You want me to call the Deathworlders. They're members of the Council. They're obligated to respond to distress beacons." "Technically obligated, yes, but we have no idea what they'll demand in return. Humans are known for their aggressive negotiations." The aide's antennae drooped. "With respect, sir, what choice do we have? It's either call the humans or watch Mathara 6 die." Thexali stared at the hologram for a long moment. The colony administrator's last message played on repeat in his mind. Men, women, and children huddled in the dark, listening to the scraping of Krynex claws above them. They were running out of food, out of water, out of hope. Every cycle that passed meant more deaths from panic, from illness, from despair. "Fine," he said finally. "Send the beacon to the human listening post. But make it clear this is a request for humanitarian assistance, not a military alliance. I don't want them thinking we owe them political favors." "Yes, sir." The aide scurried away, clearly relieved to have avoided another dead end. Thexali returned his attention to the hologram, watching the Krynex swarm tear through another section of surface infrastructure. The humans would probably ignore the beacon just like everyone else. And even if they didn't, what could one listening post accomplish? Humanity's fleet was small by galactic standards. They had maybe 24 warships total, most of them outdated designs purchased from other Council races. The Krynex swarm had already shrugged off the Mathara 6 defense force like it was nothing. He gave the colony 4 cycles before the end. Maybe 5 if they were lucky. The response came 17 minutes later. Thexali was in his private quarters, trying and failing to meditate away his stress, when his communicator chirped. He considered ignoring it, but the priority signal meant it was urgent. With a sigh that whistled through his nasal cavities, he activated the device. "Sir!" His aide's voice was breathless with excitement. "The humans responded!" "Already?" Thexali felt a spike of hope, quickly suppressed. "What did they say?" "They said, and I quote, 'Message received. Help is on the way. Hold tight.'" End quote. Thexali's scales went rigid. That was it? No questions about compensation? No demands for territorial concessions or trade agreements? No haggling over response times and resource allocation? That's all? That's all, sir. The message originated from their listening post commander, a Captain Sarah Chen. She marked it as confirmed and closed the channel. How long until they arrive? They didn't say, but based on standard fleet deployment times and the distance involved, I'd estimate 20 cycles, maybe 25 if they're sending a small task force. Thexali did the math in his head and felt his hope die. 20 cycles was too long. The colony would be gone by then. He'd sent the message anyway, just to say he'd tried everything, but it wouldn't matter. The humans were too far away. Nobody was coming to save Mathara 6. "Thank you," he told his aide. "Keep monitoring the situation. If anything changes, let me know immediately." "Yes, sir." Thexali tried to return to his meditation, but it was useless. His mind kept returning to those 15 million souls waiting to die. He'd failed them. The Council had failed them. And now the galaxy would have another tragedy to ignore, another uncomfortable footnote in the history books. He was considering whether to send a message to the colony, to at least give them false hope, when his communicator chirped again. "Sir!" His aide sounded confused now. "We're receiving a transmission from the edge of the Mathara system." "From who?" "The Krynex don't use communications." "No, sir. It's a human ship. They're requesting permission to enter the system." Thexali nearly dropped his communicator. "That's impossible. They couldn't have gotten here that fast." "Check your readings." "I've checked 3 times, sir. It's definitely a human vessel. Transponder identifies it as the UHMS Valkyrie, a heavy cruiser. They're at the jump point now and requesting clearance for immediate system entry." "One ship?" Thexali felt disappointment settle over him like a shroud. "They sent one ship?" "Sir, they're transmitting additional data. I'm forwarding it to your quarters now." The holographic display in Thexali's quarters flickered to life, showing the region of space around Mathara 6 jump point. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't one ship. The Valkyrie was there, yes. A blocky, inelegant design that looked more like an industrial hauler than a warship. But behind it, emerging from jump space in a carefully choreographed ballet of light and energy, came more ships. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Thexali counted cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and carrier vessels. He saw troop transports and medical ships, supply freighters, and repair platforms. The fleet kept coming, ship after ship after ship, until the space around the jump point blazed with running lights and engine flares. "How many?" he whispered. Sir, I'm reading over 800 vessels. It's a full battle fleet. Correction, it's multiple battle fleets operating in coordination." 800 ships. They sent 800 ships. Thexali couldn't quite process what he was seeing. The largest fleet action in Council history had involved maybe 200 vessels, and that had taken months to organize. The humans had assembled an armada in less than an hour. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the flagship. It's addressed to you personally. Put it through." The hologram shifted, replacing the fleet display with the image of a human woman in a dark blue uniform. She had short black hair, darker skin, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too many battles. The nameplate on her uniform read, Admiral Jackson, and she wore enough decorations on her chest to suggest she'd earned her rank the hard way. Representative Thex Ali, I'm Admiral Elizabeth Jackson, commanding the 5th Human Expeditionary Fleet. We received your distress call regarding the Krynex incursion at Mathara 6. We're here to render assistance. Thex Ali struggled to find his voice. Admiral, Thank you. But I must ask, why did you send so many ships? We only requested humanitarian assistance. Admiral Jackson's expression didn't change. Sir, you sent a distress beacon saying 15 million civilians were under attack by a hostile force. When humans hear something like that, we don't send what we think we can spare. We send everything we've got. But the expense, the resources, the political complications can be sorted out later, Jackson interrupted. Right now we have civilians in danger and an enemy that needs to be dealt with. My fleet is ready to engage. We just need your authorization to enter the system and commence combat operations. Thex Ali realized his scales were trembling. This strange, violent species from their death world had just committed the largest military force he'd ever seen to save a colony most of the galaxy had written off. They hadn't asked for payment. They hadn't demanded concessions. They'd simply come. Authorization granted. Admiral, Mathara 6 is under Krynex siege. The swarm has overwhelmed the surface and the colony is sheltering underground. They have maybe 4 cycles before the shelters are breached. Understood. We'll have boots on the ground in 3 hours. Jackson out. The transmission ended, and Thex Ali found himself staring at the fleet display again. 800 ships. The humans had sent 800 ships. He needed to inform the colony. They needed to know that help had arrived, that they weren't alone, that someone had answered their call. His fingers moved across the communicator controls, composing a message that would change everything. But even as he worked, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a question that would haunt him for years to come. What kind of species brings an entire armada to a humanitarian mission? And more importantly, what did it mean that humanity considered this a proportional response? On the bridge of the Valkyrie, Captain Sarah Chen watched her tactical display as the fleet organized itself into assault formations. She'd been at her listening post, bored out of her mind, when the Matharan distress beacon had crossed her desk. Most species would have forwarded it up the chain of command and waited for orders. But Chen had served in the siege of Proxima, had seen what happened when bureaucracy delayed military response. So she'd made a command decision. She'd activated the 5th Fleet's emergency beacon, calling in every human ship within 10 light years. And they'd come. Of course they'd come, because that's what humans did. Captain, Admiral Jackson is requesting tactical data on the Krynex swarm, her communications officer reported. Send her everything we have and patch me through to the colony administrator. They need to know what's about to happen. The comm officer nodded, and a moment later a haggard Matharan face appeared on Chen's screen. The administrator looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past few cycles. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Human Military Ship Valkyrie. We're here to help. I need you to keep your people underground for the next few hours. Things are going to get loud up there. The administrator's eyes widened. You're really here? We thought no one was coming. We're here, and we're not leaving until every one of you is safe. Chen out. She closed the channel and turned to her weapons officer. What's our payload status? Full complement, ma'am. Missiles, railguns, plasma batteries, and kinetic bombardment packages all ready to deploy. Good. When the Admiral gives the word, I want us to light up that swarm like it's the 4th of July. The weapons officer grinned. Aye, Captain. They're not going to know what hit them. Chen allowed herself a small smile. The Krynex swarm had picked the wrong planet to attack. They'd terrorized this colony for days, made them feel helpless and alone. But now humanity had arrived, and humanity didn't abandon people who needed help. The fleet moved forward, 800 ships burning toward Mathara 6 like a wave of steel and fire. In the underground shelters, 15 million people held their breath and waited. Salvation was on its way, and it had brought an armada. The Krynex swarm didn't know fear. It was biomechanical, a hybrid of organic tissue and synthetic components that had been consuming worlds for 3,000 years. It operated on simple imperatives: locate, consume, replicate, expand. Individual units possessed no consciousness, no emotion, no capacity for anything beyond their programming. But if the swarm could have felt fear, it would have felt it now. The human fleet descended on Mathara 6 like the wrath of an angry god. Admiral Jackson had organized her forces into 3 waves, each designed to accomplish specific objectives while overwhelming the swarm's ability to adapt. The first wave consisted of electronic warfare ships that blanketed the planet's surface with jamming signals, disrupting the swarm's coordination networks. Krynex units that had operated with mechanical efficiency suddenly found themselves isolated, confused, unable to communicate with the central hive nodes. The second wave arrived 30 seconds later. Missile frigates released their payloads in a synchronized barrage that turned the sky above Mathara 6 white with contrails. Thousands of warheads screamed toward the surface, each one guided by targeting systems that could track individual swarm units through smoke, debris, and electromagnetic interference. The missiles struck with mathematical precision, vaporizing Krynex concentrations and leaving the colony infrastructure untouched. Colony Administrator Vex Thune watched from the shelter's command center as the surface cameras captured the assault. He'd never seen anything like it. The swarm had seemed unstoppable, an endless tide of claws and teeth and cold machine logic. But the humans were tearing through it like it was made of paper. "How are they doing this?" he whispered to his security chief. The chief, a grizzled veteran named Court, shook his head slowly. "I've fought in 16 campaigns. Never seen firepower like this. Not even close." On the screens, the third wave was arriving now. Heavy cruisers and battleships settled into low orbit, their massive railguns tracking targets across the planet's surface. Each ship carried enough ordnance to crack a moon, and they were using it all. Kinetic penetrators traveling at relativistic speeds punched through the atmosphere and struck swarm concentrations with the force of small nuclear weapons. Where they hit, Krynex units simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the impact energy. But the true genius of the assault wasn't the firepower, it was the coordination. Every ship in the human fleet operated as part of a larger organism, sharing targeting data and adjusting tactics in real time. When one section of the swarm tried to retreat underground, human ground-penetrating munitions collapsed the tunnels. When another section tried to scatter and hide, sensor platforms identified every unit and directed precision strikes. The Krynex swarm had survived for millennia by adapting to enemy tactics. But you couldn't adapt when your enemy hit you everywhere at once with overwhelming force. In the underground shelters, people began to emerge from their hiding places. Families hugged each other, crying with relief. Children who hadn't seen sunlight in days pressed their faces against viewing ports, watching the sky light up with explosions. Someone started singing an old Matharan hymn, and within minutes, the entire shelter had joined in. Administrator Vex Thune felt tears streaming down his face. They were going to survive. Against all odds, against the indifference of the Galactic Council, against the swarm that had terrorized them for days, they were going to survive. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human flagship." Vex Thune wiped his eyes and straightened his uniform. "Put it through." Admiral Jackson appeared on the screen, and Vex Thune was struck by how calm she looked. This woman had just coordinated the largest military operation he'd ever witnessed, and she wasn't even breathing hard. "Administrator Vex Thune, this is Admiral Jackson. The orbital bombardment phase is complete. We're beginning ground operations now. I'm sending down medical teams, engineers, and supply drops. Is there anything your people need immediately?" Admiral, we need everything. Food, water, medical supplies, power generators. The swarm destroyed most of our surface infrastructure. Understood. We've got it covered. I'm also deploying combat units to sweep the surface and underground areas. There are still scattered Krynex units out there, and I won't consider this planet secure until every last one is eliminated. Vexthun nodded, then hesitated. Admiral, may I ask, why did you send so many ships? We're grateful, but it seems like more than we deserved. Jackson's expression softened slightly. Administrator, no one deserves to be abandoned when they're in danger. Your colony sent a distress call. We answered. That's all there is to it. The transmission ended, and Vexthun stood in silence for a long moment. The humans had crossed 3 star systems and committed an entire armada to save a colony that most species considered expendable. They'd asked for nothing in return, demanded no concessions, expected no gratitude. What kind of species did that? On the surface of Matheras 6, the landing craft touched down in waves. Sergeant Marcus Webb was among the first boots on the ground, leading a platoon of Marines from the destroyer Houston. He'd been in combat before, had fought pirates in the Outer Rim and suppressed rebellions on frontier worlds, but he'd never seen devastation like this. The Krynex swarm had torn the planet apart. Buildings stood as skeletal ruins, their walls stripped of anything organic. Streets were carpeted with debris and the twisted remains of Krynex units destroyed in the orbital bombardment. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal, and the only sound was the wind whistling through empty structures. Stay sharp, Webb ordered his squad. Sensors show scattered Krynex units in the area. They're wounded and disorganized, but they're still dangerous. His second-in-command, Corporal Lisa Torres, checked her rifle's charge indicator. Rules of engagement, Sarge? Anything with Krynex biotech gets neutralized. Anything that looks like it might threaten civilians gets neutralized. When in doubt, shoot first and file paperwork later. The squad moved through the ruins in tactical formation, their weapons tracking every shadow and movement. The Krynex had been terrifying when they were coordinated, but the scattered survivors were almost pitiful. Individual units stumbled through the wreckage, their neural links severed, operating on basic survival instincts. Webb's squad encountered their first contact 3 blocks from the landing zone. A Krynex drone, about the size of a large dog, was trying to burrow into the ground when Torres spotted it. She put 3 plasma bolts through its central processor before it even registered their presence. Confirmed kill, she reported. 1 unit down. Copy that. Stay alert. We've got movement in the building ahead. The building was what remained of a residential complex. The walls had been stripped away, revealing the interior rooms like a dollhouse. Webb could see the remnants of civilian life, furniture, personal belongings. Children's toys scattered across the floor. The Krynex had destroyed everything without mercy or hesitation. He led his squad inside, moving carefully through the debris. The movement they detected was coming from the basement level, and as they descended the stairs, Webb activated his helmet's low-light sensors. The basement was dark, the power grid long since destroyed, but his sensors painted the scene in shades of green and gray. There were Krynex units down here, maybe a dozen of them, huddled together in what looked like a damaged hive node. They weren't attacking or even moving much, just clustering around their broken machinery like animals seeking warmth. Torres, call in the position. I want combat engineers to sweep this location after we clear it. Roger that. Webb raised his rifle, sighting on the nearest Krynex unit. It was a simple enough shot. The unit was stationary, unaware of their presence. 1 trigger pull and it would be over, but something made him hesitate. The Krynex weren't evil, not really. They were just following their programming, doing what they'd been designed to do 3,000 years ago by whoever had created them. They were weapons, no different from the rifle in his hands. And like any weapon, they were only dangerous when someone pointed them at a target. Still, orders were orders. The Krynex couldn't be allowed to survive and potentially regroup. Webb steadied his aim and started firing. The sweep took 6 hours. Webb's platoon cleared 12 blocks, eliminating 47 Krynex units and discovering 3 intact hive nodes that the engineers subsequently demolished. By the time they returned to the landing zone, the sun was setting, painting the ruined city in shades of orange and purple. The landing zone had transformed during their absence. Engineering crews had erected temporary shelters, power generators hummed to life across the area, and medical tents were processing civilians brought up from the underground shelters. Supply pallets were stacked everywhere. Food, water, medicine, construction materials, everything the colony would need to rebuild. Webb watched as human medics treated Metheran civilians, noting how gentle they were despite the language barrier and biological differences. A human doctor was using a translation device to explain a treatment plan to a Metheran mother while her child received care in the next tent. Nearby, engineers were consulting with local workers on the best approach to restoring the power grid. "Hell of a thing, isn't it?" Torres said, appearing at his elbow. "What is?" "All this. We traveled 3 star systems, brought an entire fleet, spent billions in ordnance and resources. For people we'd never met. For a colony most of our own government couldn't find on a map." Webb nodded slowly. "That's humanity for you. Someone calls for help, we answer. Think the rest of the galaxy understands that? Probably not. Most species seem to think we're crazy for doing this." Torres grinned. "Well, they're not wrong. We are crazy. But I wouldn't want to be any other way." In orbit above Methara 6, Admiral Jackson reviewed casualty reports with grim satisfaction. The ground operation had resulted in 0 human casualties and only minor injuries among the civilian population during evacuation procedures. The Krynex swarm was effectively eliminated, with scattered units being hunted down by cleanup crews. The colony was secure. "Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from Council Representative Thexali," her communications officer reported. "Put him through." Thexali's hologram materialized on the bridge, and Jackson noted he looked considerably better than he had during their first conversation. His scales were no longer modeled with stress colors, and his posture suggested relief rather than despair. "Admiral Jackson, I wanted to thank you personally for what your fleet has done here. The colony administrator reports that civilian casualties were minimal and the swarm has been neutralized. I've informed the Galactic Council of your swift and effective response." "Glad we could help, Representative. My people are working with local authorities on reconstruction efforts. We'll maintain a presence here until the colony is back on its feet." Thexali hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Admiral, I must ask, your military response was far beyond what standard protocol would dictate for a humanitarian mission. 800 ships, thousands of personnel, enough ordnance to destroy a small fleet. Why did humanity commit such overwhelming force to this situation?" Jackson considered her answer carefully. This was the question she'd been expecting, the one that would determine how the galaxy viewed humanity's actions here. "Representative, humans have a saying, 'No one left behind.' When someone calls for help, we don't calculate the political value or economic return. We don't measure the worth of lives based on their species or location. We simply respond with everything we have, because that's what we'd want others to do for us. But the expense, the resources, can be replaced. Lives can't. 15 million people were in danger. We did what we had to do to save them." Thexali was quiet for a long moment. "The Council will want to discuss this operation. There will be questions about humanity's military capabilities and strategic intentions." "We'll answer their questions honestly. But let me be clear, Representative. We didn't come here to demonstrate power or intimidate anyone. We came because people needed help. If that makes the Council nervous, that's their problem, not ours. I understand, Admiral. And for what it's worth, I'm grateful that humanity chose to answer our call. Most of the galaxy wrote off Mathara 6. You didn't. The transmission ended, and Jackson turned back to her tactical displays. The operation was winding down, but there was still work to do. Cleanup crews were sweeping the planet for remaining Krynex units. Engineers were helping restore infrastructure, and medical teams were treating the last of the injured civilians. It was good work, the kind that reminded her why she'd joined the military in the first place. Not to conquer or intimidate, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. "Captain Morris," she called to her flag captain, "prepare a report for Fleet Command. Include casualty figures, resource expenditure, and tactical assessments. I want it on their desks before the politicians start asking questions." "Aye, Admiral. Any particular spin you want me to put on it?" Jackson smiled. "Just the facts. The facts are impressive enough on their own." Below, on the surface of Mathara 6, the sun set on a planet that had been given a second chance. Families emerged from shelters to find human soldiers standing guard, human medics tending to their wounds, human engineers rebuilding their homes. Some of them would spend the rest of their lives trying to repay the debt they felt they owed. But the humans would never ask for repayment. They'd done what they came to do, saved the people who needed saving, and that was enough. For humanity, it was just another day of proving that civilization meant more than treaties and trade agreements. It meant showing up when you were needed regardless of the cost. And if that terrified the rest of the galaxy, well, that was their problem to solve. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 3 standard days after the Mathara 6 incident. Representatives from 47 member species filled the Grand Chamber, their attention focused on the holographic display showing footage of the human fleet in action. The images played in uncomfortable silence, 800 warships moving in perfect coordination, weapons fire that could crack moons, and ground forces sweeping through the planet with terrifying efficiency. Council Speaker Ventari, a elderly Dorvathi whose species had sat on the council for 6 centuries, watched the footage with mounting concern. He'd seen military operations before, had authorized dozens of fleet deployments during his tenure, but he'd never seen anything like this. The human response to Mathara 6 hadn't been a military operation. It had been a demonstration. Representative Thexali stood at the speaker's podium, his scales neutral gray in the council chamber's lighting. He'd spent the past 3 days composing his report, trying to find words that would convey both gratitude and warning. The humans had saved 15 million lives. They'd also revealed military capabilities that dwarfed anything the council had suspected. "The facts are straightforward," Thexali began. "Mathara 6 issued a distress beacon requesting assistance against a Krynex swarm incursion. Multiple council members received this beacon and chose not to respond due to strategic considerations. The humans received the same beacon and responded within 1 standard hour with a fleet of over 800 vessels." 800, someone muttered from the assembly. "That's more ships than most species have in their entire navy." Thexali continued. "The human fleet eliminated the Krynex threat in approximately 6 hours. Civilian casualties were minimal. The colony is now secure and undergoing reconstruction with human assistance. By all measures, the operation was a complete success." Council Speaker Ventari leaned forward. "Representative Thexali, your report is appreciated. However, this council has concerns that extend beyond the successful resolution of the Mathara 6 crisis. The humans deployed overwhelming military force in response to a relatively minor incident on a border colony. What does this tell us about their capabilities, their intentions?" "With respect, Speaker, 15 million lives is not a minor incident." "You know what I mean. The political implications of this action cannot be ignored. The humans have revealed they possess fleet strength comparable to the oldest and most established council races. They responded to a humanitarian crisis, as if it were an invasion of their homeworld. This suggests either massive military overreach or a demonstration intended to intimidate other species. Thexali felt his scales flush with anger, but he controlled his response. I was present for Admiral Jackson's communication. She was clear that humanity responded with everything they had, because lives were at stake. There was no political calculation, no strategic posturing, just action. That's precisely what concerns me, Ventari said quietly. A species that commits 800 warships without political calculation is unpredictable, dangerous. Before Thexali could respond, the chamber doors opened and a human delegation entered. Admiral Elizabeth Jackson led the group, flanked by 2 human diplomats and a military honor guard. She wore her formal uniform, the one with all the medals and decorations that made her look like she'd personally fought in every conflict humanity had ever experienced. Council Speaker Ventari, thank you for receiving us on short notice, Jackson said. Her voice was calm, professional, but there was steel underneath. I understand this council has questions about our actions at Mathera 6. We're here to provide answers. Ventari gestured to the human section of the chamber. Admiral Jackson, your presence is appreciated. Please, explain why humanity felt it necessary to deploy such overwhelming force in response to a distress beacon. Jackson moved to the speaker's podium, her posture military straight. The answer is simple, Speaker. Someone called for help. We had the resources to respond. We responded. That's all there is to it. But 800 ships was what we could assemble in the time frame available, Jackson interrupted. Would you have preferred we send fewer ships and risk losing the colony? A Krevesh representative spoke up, his translator rendering his chittering into flat, emotionless words. Admiral, your fleet included heavy cruisers, battleships, and carrier groups. This is not humanitarian response equipment. This is invasion force equipment. Jackson turned to face the Krevesh representative directly. With respect, our ships are multi-role vessels capable of both combat and support operations. Every cruiser in our fleet carries medical facilities, supply stores, and engineering equipment. We don't maintain separate humanitarian vessels because we've learned that emergencies don't wait for the right kind of ship to be available. That's a convenient excuse, another representative called out. It's the truth, Jackson replied sharply. And frankly, I'm struggling to understand why this council is more concerned about our response than the fact that none of you responded at all. The chamber fell silent. Thexali watched as representatives shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with each other and with the humans. Jackson had just said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to acknowledge. Ventari cleared his throat. Admiral, the Council's concern is not about the success of your mission. It's about the precedent being set. If humanity responds to every distress call with a full battle fleet, it creates an imbalance of power. Other species may feel intimidated or threatened. Then those species need to examine their own priorities, Jackson said bluntly. Humanity joined this council 15 years ago because we believed in the ideals it represented. Mutual aid, peaceful cooperation, protection of innocent lives. If other species feel threatened because we actually live up to those ideals, that's not our problem. A Xinthian representative spoke up, her voice dripping with condescension. Admiral Jackson, perhaps your species simply doesn't understand the complexity of galactic politics. Military responses must be carefully calibrated to avoid escalation and unintended consequences. Your enthusiasm, while well-intentioned, could destabilize the entire region. Jackson's expression hardened. Let me tell you something about human history. We come from a world so hostile that most council species classify it as uninhabitable. We evolved fighting our planet every single day, Storms that could tear apart buildings, predators that could kill us with one bite, diseases that wiped out entire populations. We learned early that survival means helping each other because nobody survives alone on a death world. She paused, letting her words sink in. When we joined the galactic community, we brought those values with us. When someone needs help, we help. We don't calculate political advantages or worry about upsetting trade balances. We act. If that makes us unpredictable or dangerous in your eyes, so be it. But I'd rather be dangerous and save lives than safe and watch people die. The chamber erupted in conversation, representatives arguing among themselves in a dozen languages. Ventari struggled to restore order, his voice barely audible above the chaos. Finally, he activated the chamber's silence protocols, cutting off all communication except his own. Admiral Jackson, I think we all appreciate humanity's dedication to humanitarian ideals. However, this council must consider the broader implications of your actions. I'm proposing we form a committee to study the Mathara 6 incident and develop guidelines for appropriate military responses to future crises. Jackson smiled, and Thexali recognized it as the smile of someone who'd just won a debate they'd expected to lose. That's an excellent idea, Speaker. And while your committee is studying our actions, I'd like to propose some questions for them to consider. Why did it take 17 minutes for humanity to respond to the Mathara 6 beacon while other species took days or didn't respond at all? Why does the Council maintain massive military fleets if not to protect its member worlds? And most importantly, what message does it send to Council citizens when their government abandons them in their darkest hour? Ventari's face went through several interesting color changes. Those are inflammatory questions. Those are honest questions, and they deserve honest answers. Jackson gathered her delegation with a gesture. Thank you for your time, Council Speaker. Humanity will continue to respond to distress beacons from Council worlds because that's what membership in this organization means to us. If the Council wishes to debate the appropriateness of that response, feel free. But don't expect us to sit by and watch people die while you discuss politics. The human delegation left the chamber, their exit marked by uncomfortable silence. Thexali watched them go, then turned his attention back to the council. The representatives were already breaking into factions, some arguing that humanity had overstepped, others suggesting the council had failed its basic obligations. Speaker, Thexali said quietly. If I may? Ventari gestured for him to continue. I was on Mathara 6 during the crisis. I saw the fear in those people's eyes when they realized the council wasn't coming. I also saw their faces when the human fleet arrived. The humans didn't calculate the political value of those lives. They didn't weigh the strategic importance of the colony. They saw people in danger, and they acted. Maybe that makes them unpredictable. Maybe it makes them dangerous. But it also makes them the only species in this chamber who actually lived up to the ideals this council was founded on. The words hung in the air like an accusation. Thexali returned to his seat, knowing he'd probably just ended his political career. But some things were more important than politics. 6 months later, on a human colony world called New Brisbane, a small delegation of Metharan refugees gathered for a ceremony. They'd traveled there specifically to thank the humans who'd saved their world, and to present a gift that had taken them months to create. Administrator Vexthun stood before a crowd of several hundred humans, holding a crystalline sculpture that depicted the moment the human fleet had arrived at Mathara 6. It was beautiful work, created by Mathara's finest artisans using techniques passed down through generations. We didn't know if anyone would come, Vexthun said, his voice carrying through the translation devices. We sent our distress call into the void, hoping someone, anyone, would hear it and care enough to respond. Most of the galaxy didn't, but humanity did. Not because it was profitable, not because it was strategic, but simply because it was right. He held up the sculpture. This is a monument to the moment our world was saved. But it's also a promise. Methera 66 will never forget what humanity did for us. And if the day comes when humanity needs help, we will answer that call without hesitation. We will bring everything we have, just as you brought everything you had for us. Captain Sarah Chen stood in the crowd, wearing her dress uniform and feeling distinctly uncomfortable with all the attention. She'd only done what any decent person would do: answered a distress call. The fact that the rest of the galaxy considered this extraordinary said more about them than it did about humanity. Beside her, Admiral Jackson whispered, "This is why we do it, you know. Not for the ceremonies or the gratitude, but knowing that when we act, we inspire others to be better." "Think the Council learned anything from this?" Chen asked. "Maybe, maybe not. But at least they know humanity won't stand by and watch innocent people die. That's something." The ceremony continued, with Metheran children singing traditional songs and human musicians responding with melodies from Earth. It was a moment of genuine cross-species connection, the kind that treaties and trade agreements could never create. Later that evening, Chen found herself in a bar near the ceremony site, sharing drinks with some of the Marines who'd participated in the ground operation. Sergeant Webb was there, telling stories about the Krynex sweep that got more exaggerated with each retelling. "So there I was, surrounded by 50 Krynex units?" "It was 12, Corporal Torres interrupted. "I was there. Remember? 12 units, each the size of a small building. They were the size of large dogs. And I looked at them and said, 'Not today, you biomechanical bastards. Not today.'" The group laughed, and Chen felt something loosen in her chest. This was what she'd fought for at Methera 6. Not glory or recognition, but the simple joy of people living their lives without fear. The Metherans could rebuild now, could raise their children in safety, could look up at the stars without wondering when the next threat would arrive. Her communicator chirped, displaying a priority message from Fleet Command. Chen opened it, expecting new orders or deployment schedules. Instead, she found a simple message. "Captain Chen, your decision to activate emergency protocols and deploy the Fifth Fleet has been reviewed by Command Authority. Your actions resulted in the successful rescue of 15 million civilians with 0 friendly casualties. Well done. You are hereby promoted to Rear Admiral, effective immediately. Congratulations, and thank you for exemplifying the best of humanity's values. Fleet Admiral Kowalski." Chen stared at the message for a long moment, then looked around at her team. They were still laughing, still telling stories, still being themselves. These were the people who'd crossed 3-star systems because someone needed help. They'd risked their lives for strangers, committed everything they had to saving a colony most of the galaxy had written off. "Admiral?" Torres asked, noticing Chen's expression. "Everything okay?" Chen smiled and raised her glass. "Everything's fine. I just got a reminder of why I'm proud to serve with all of you." The glasses clinked together, and the celebration continued. Outside, the night sky of New Brisbane blazed with stars, each one representing another world, another chance for humanity to prove that civilization meant more than treaties and trade. It meant standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It meant answering the call, no matter the cost. And if that made humanity dangerous in the eyes of the Galactic Council, so be it. There were worse things to be feared for than saving lives. Back on Methera 6, children played in rebuilt parks while their parents worked to restore their world. The Krynex were gone, eliminated so thoroughly that even their remains had been catalogued and removed. In the central plaza, workers were installing the crystalline sculpture that the delegation had presented to the humans, a twin to the one they'd given as a gift. The monument depicted the moment the human fleet had arrived, 800 ships blazing through the darkness like falling stars. At its base, a plaque bore a simple inscription in both Matharan and human languages. They came when no one else would. They brought everything they had. They asked for nothing in return. This is what it means to be civilized. Administrator Vexthun stood before the monument as the sun set, painting the crystal in shades of orange and gold. His world had been saved by strangers who'd become friends, by warriors who'd proven that strength without compassion was meaningless. The galaxy was still learning what it meant when humanity answered a distress call. But Mathara 6 knew. They'd seen it firsthand, lived through it, survived because of it. When you called the Deathworlders, they brought an armada, not to conquer or intimidate, but to save. And in doing so, they'd shown the galaxy what true civilization looked like. It looked like 800 ships burning through the darkness. It looked like soldiers fighting for people they'd never met. It looked like engineers rebuilding what had been destroyed, medics healing the wounded, and diplomats standing before a council and saying, "We did the right thing and we'd do it again." That was humanity. Unpredictable, dangerous, and absolutely unwilling to let innocent people die while politics were debated. The galaxy would learn to live with that, or it would learn to be better. Either way, humanity would keep answering the call. Because that's what heroes do.